Have you ever seen strange things floating in the sky, or objects that appear humanoid? I think this was probably just a kite. In this bedtime story, borrowing a quote from Mr. Tony, do you believe in reincarnation? If you were to ask me whether I believe in taoist immortals or extraterrestrials, I would never choose extraterrestrials. This story comes from a netizen named X. He said that when he was 12 years old, he saw a strange old man with long hair floating in the sky amid a thunderstorm. After several thick lightning bolts, with a purple glow struck, the old man mysteriously disappeared. A special note, this story is for entertainment purposes only. Let's go back to this story. At that time, X was only 7 years old, and something unsettling happened in their village. It all began when X's neighbor, Auntie Wang, who was picking mushrooms on the mountain, claimed to have seen a ragged stranger squatting by some rocks, acting suspiciously, as if looking for something. When the stranger sensed that he had been spotted, he quickly ran towards a deep and bottomless cave. Initially, this incident didn't seem like a big deal. Perhaps it was just someone relieving themselves in the woods. However, coincidentally, a major criminal case occurred in their town around the same time, and the suspect had not been apprehended yet. X's village chief immediately linked the strange man on the mountainside to the suspect. This information quickly made its way to the city police department. The next day, armed police officers arrived in their village, and X's neighbors led them to the mountains to investigate the whereabouts of the strange man. At this point, it was still a preliminary inquiry. If there had been solid leads, they would have organized a larger search operation. Nevertheless, rumors spread like wildfire in X's village, claiming that there was a fugitive in the mountains, possibly hiding in the deep cave. Everyone in the village became anxious. However, X's grandfather was excited, because when he was 12, he had prepared to enlist but the Japanese surrendered. Later, during the Korean War, he wanted to join, but he wasn't selected. So, throughout his life, X's grandfather had only participated in militia training and had only shot at targets. This time, upon hearing that there might be a fugitive in the mountains, X's grandfather, who was in his 60s, decided to carry the shoulder bullet bags he had kept from his militia training decades ago, and took 2 machetes in his hands. He called X's father to join him in assisting the police. It was later learned that X's older uncle made a long-distance call from the military, advising his father not to go, which prompted X's grandfather to give up on going into the mountains. So, X remembered this incident very clearly. However, this time when the police went up the mountain to investigate, it seems they didn't find any useful leads. It's possible that the police confirmed that the strange person on the mountain wasn't the suspect, as they didn't return afterward, and there were no further large-scale searches conducted. But this incident had a significant impact on X's village. The first impact was that adults forbade children from playing on that mountain. Another impact was that X's grandfather developed a strong liking for that mountain, and especially enjoyed sitting outside the large cave while tending to his sheep. As a result, the sheep became thin as there was no grass around, only bare rocks. Almost a year later, it was reported on TV that the fugitive from their city had already been captured in another province. Starting from that point, adults gradually stopped preventing children from entering the mountain, and that's when something strange happened. One evening, just before dinner, as the sun was setting and casting a red glow over the mountain valley, the entrance of the cave was illuminated. It looked as if the cave was on fire, and some villagers passing by noticed and returned to the village, saying that the cave beneath Iron Pine Cliff now looked as if it were on fire. Very beautiful. Just at that moment, X was on his way to the cave to call his grandfather for dinner at their house that evening. So, he dashed towards it, eager to see just how beautiful it really was. However, sunsets in the mountains are fleeting, and by the time X arrived, the sunlight no longer graced the cave. Yet, as X stood on the mountainside, gazing down towards the cave's location at the base, it appeared as if a bright red glow still lingered there, akin to a blazing fire. X called for his grandfather as he ran down towards the cave. However, when X reached the entrance of this large cave, he discovered that it wasn't on fire. You see, That red light pulsed in and out, in rhythmic waves, much like a breathing lamp. At that moment, X's grandfather disappeared. Only a few sheep stood on the bare rocks, staring blankly. X gathered up the courage and walked to the entrance of the cave. He shouted loudly into it, "Grandpa, Grandpa, come home for dinner." This cave had a sound amplifying effect, so when people stood at the entrance and shouted, it could be heard from far inside. Sure enough, after about 10 minutes or so, X's grandfather hurriedly emerged from the cave. However, the first thing he did was cover X's mouth and sternly said, "Don't shout loudly. You've disturbed the immortals." X didn't think much of it, because this cave was said to have been inhabited by immortals in legends. Additionally, many caves in the Yunnan Guizhou Changqing region were associated with immortals, often named Immortal Cave or Sage Cave. But strangely, after that day, X's grandfather never went near the cave to graze the sheep. Only during festivals or holidays did he go, but he avoided it at other times. When asked why, X's grandfather remained mysterious and refused to provide an explanation. It wasn't until 4 years later, when X turned 12, that something strange happened again in the mountain. It was during the summer vacation of 2002, in early August. They had continuous heavy rain for 6 or 7 days. Normally, it rained at night in the mountains, but during this time, it rained during the day and thundered at night. Lightning struck one after another, and X, standing at his doorstep, could see that the lightning bolts were hitting the area near the cave. Those days, X's grandfather acted strangely too. With heavy rain every day, people stayed indoors to play mahjong or cards. But he went to the town every morning to buy alcohol, carrying 2 empty jugs with him, saying he was buying wine. However, when he returned in the evening, the jugs were still empty. X didn't know if his grandfather had actually bought wine or if he had poured it out on the way. Regardless, he spent every day in the mountains with empty jugs. The heavy rain continued for a whole week until one evening. X's family had just finished dinner, and his grandfather arrived, saying he had a dream a few nights ago. In the dream, Bodhisattva said he wanted some wine, and asked his grandfather to deliver it. Now, he wanted to take wine to the cave for Bodhisattva, and asked X to accompany him. X's father offered to go with them for safety reasons, but his grandfather declined. So, X followed behind his grandfather as they headed to the cave. It was just past 7 p.m., and it wasn't completely dark yet. They brought flashlights but didn't turn them on, as they could still see the way. As they neared the cave, X smelled a strong, sweet fragrance, like a kind of flower, even more fragrant than yellow orchids. The closer they got to the cave, the stronger the fragrance became, until they reached the valley where the cave was located. At this point, the cave was still a bit far off, but the fragrance was already overwhelming. X and his grandfather were both nearly overwhelmed by the scent. Suddenly, a lightning bolt struck silently from the sky, directly over the distant cave. In that momentary flash of light, X saw a person floating in the air ahead. It seemed like the lightning was directed at the person. X quickly turned on his flashlight to get a better look at the person floating in midair. He said to his grandfather, "Grandpa, look, there's a man with long hair in the sky." His grandfather, however, became angry and told him to turn off the flashlight and kneel down. His tone was very stern. X didn't dare to argue and knelt down immediately, but he couldn't help glancing up secretly. His grandfather then told him to start breathing deeply. X didn't understand why but saw that his grandfather was doing it too, so he followed suit. As they were breathing, X suddenly fell asleep. His grandfather carried him back home later. After this incident, X told others that he and his grandfather had seen a man with long hair flying in the sky above the cave, and they had also seen many purple lightning bolts. However, his grandfather denied everything, claiming nothing had happened. This story stayed in X's mind for a long time. He shared it with me, hoping to see if anyone had similar experiences. It's worth noting that his grandfather passed away in last year, and he never admitted to seeing anything unusual that night. One final reminder: never climb mountains during thunderstorms. When lightning strikes on the mountain, it can easily form ground lightning, which is extremely dangerous. That's the end of today's story. I'm Coco. Thank you for listening. Good night, goodbye.